Hi, I am Jennifer Owens. I lead marketing here at Flowcarbon. Be sure to follow Flowcarbon on LinkedIn, on YouTube, X, and Instagram for upcoming events that we have. We always alert everyone what's happening and exciting news over at Flowcarbon there. Now, it is my great honor. I'm going to share the mic, pass it over to Caroline Klatt, who is our co-founder and COO, and she's going to lead us in the conversation today. Please take the mic.
Thanks, Jennifer. I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to lead our discussion today. We have a lot to cover in 45 minutes with hopefully 10 minutes for Q&A. So in that spirit, I'm going to share a brief introduction of our panelists, and then we'll jump into the discussion. To start with, we have two close friends of Flowcarbon. Jamie Bakos is the president and CEO of Titan Clean Energy. Titan is a biochar carbon removal project based in Saskatchewan, Canada. Jamie launched Titan in 2008 to bring groundbreaking technologies to the activated carbon market. Since then, Titan has created more than a dozen activated charcoal-based products across a variety of markets, from soil amendments to veterinarian products and health and beauty ingredients. And since 2023, we've been honored to partner with Titan to work on bringing its credits to the voluntary carbon market. And we're proud to share that Titan has been named the top 100 finalists for the X Prize competition, intended to encourage technological development in carbon removal. And this is a good segue to Joe Kochanski, the head of operations of for Americas at Puro Earth. Joe leads business development and operational affairs in the Americas for Puro, which is the leading accrediting platform for engineered carbon removal. We're always happy when Joe can lend his insights to our events. So thanks, Joe. Martin Kessler is our Chief Business Officer here at Flowcarbon, leading revenue generating activities at Flowcarbon, which covers financing, carbon development, and credit sales. Martin came to Flowcarbon from HSBC, where he built and led regional and global sales businesses focused on derivative and structured credit solutions. And last but not least is Myles Gray, Program Director for the U.S. Biochar Initiative, a nonprofit organization promoting the sustainable production and use of biochar through research, policy, and technology. At USBI, Myles develops strategy, leads projects, and manages subcontractors, and collaborates with partner companies and organizations to help develop biochar as a holistic solution to remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Thank you, all of you, for joining us.
Thank you.
All right, so Myles, I'm going to dive right in and ask you to paint the current picture of the biochar market for us, beginning with a brief overview of what biochar is and the role it plays in carbon removal and storage.
Yeah, great. So the way I think about biochar, first off, is that it's both a material and a technology. So the material it's a black carbon. It's very much like charcoal, except that is differently from charcoal, which is used for heat to cook with. Biochar is not used to produce heat or energy. In fact, it can't be used to produce heat or energy is one of the main definitions of what biochar is. The structure of that material, of biochar, makes it so it's really resistant to microbial decay in the environment. So most biochars are going to last on the order of 500 to several thousand years in the environment. So it's a type of carbon that is extremely long-lived in the atmosphere, in the environment. Now, as a carbon removal technology, essentially biochar is the process of converting a waste biomass, things like wood chips or agricultural residue or even manures or biosolids from wastewater treatment plants. It's the process of converting that from that waste biomass into biochar. And that process also releases heat, so it can be used to produce energy or electricity or other fuels. But it produces a whole bunch of biochar. So about half the carbon ends up as biochar. And so that's kind of where biochar fits in as a carbon dioxide removal strategy. It's converting biogenic CO2 from waste biomass into a long-lived form of carbon storage.
Thank you. The USBI just joined with the International Biochar Initiative to release the 2023 Global Biochar Market Report, which is the first industry-led global biochar report since 2015, and a complement to the annual market report from the European Biochar Industry Consortium. I was happy to have some numbers to put to what we're seeing in the market, that biochar continues to lead the way in delivering durable carbon removal. The report put global production at about 350,000 metric tons of biochar in 2023. I was particularly impressed to see that biochar represented 81% of CDR credit sales. And yet the biochar industry receives only 12% of funding for CDR technologies last year. Can you give us some sense of what's happening in the industry right now? What's fueling the disconnect in terms of the investment and the output?
Yeah, first off, I'll say that one of my main takeaways from that report was that the biochar industry is really growing rapidly. And we're really proud of that, and we hope it continues to lead the way. And I think for a variety of reasons it will. As far as the funding gap, first off, I'll say that a lot of the funding data that's available looks really at venture capital funding into different CDR technologies. There's a lot of other money going into the biochar industry that's not represented in those figures. Biochar is financeable in a way that many other CDR technologies aren't. And that's really because it's much more shovel ready. The technological readiness level of biochar is much higher than a lot of other technologies right now. Second, I'll say that a lot of the money that's being driven into the CDR industry is coming from the venture capital space, particularly those figures that you cited. So when we think about venture capital, we're thinking about relatively high rates of return on investment. It's relatively expensive money as well. And as I said, biochar is much higher on the technological readiness ladder than a lot of other CDR technologies. It's also a type of technology it's fairly straightforward. We're heating biomass in the absence of oxygen to create biochar. There are ways to do it differently, for sure, and there are spaces for a lot of venture capital to enter the space, but there probably aren't the types of returns that you might expect, given that it's a relatively straightforward approach. So the scaling process might not create those enormous returns on investment. That said, biochar is currently financeable in certain situations for debt, essentially, right? You can debt finance some of these facilities, which in a lot of ways is a better position to be than looking for venture capital funding. Another couple of reasons, the biochar technology itself is pretty complex, right? So we're producing biochar as a CDR credit. We're also producing a physical product, and we're producing heat, electricity, or fuels. So there's a lot of complexity in what it is the biochar process produces. And if you look at biochar just through the lens of what's the most efficient way to remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, it's true, biochar only converts about half of biomass into a durable form of carbon storage. So it's only about 50% efficient at best at converting that waste biomass into biochar, but it provides a lot of other co-benefits. So if you're just looking at it from the lens of CDR, it might not score as highly as we would like it to, but that's only because a lot of these co-benefits aren't being considered by certain organizations. And then finally, I think there's been this focus on 1,000-year storage or bust. And I fully support the idea of long-lived carbon storage for sure. That has led some organizations, I think, to consider biochar to not be a suitable CDR technology. Whether or not that 1,000-year storage target remains, I think, is an open question. But at the same time, there's increasing evidence that biochar itself does in fact last for 1,000 years, or the vast majority of it does.
Thank you. That's very helpful. When we think about, so you touched upon this a little bit, all the co-benefits of biochar, but can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so on the sort of fuels and energy side, the process of creating biochar creates essentially combustible vapors. Those can be used to burn for electricity or heat, which is good. We can create things like biomass energy. They can also be used to condense into things like fuels. There's a lot of potential to create sustainable aviation fuel via pyrolysis, where biochar might actually end up being a co-product of that process. So that's kind of on the production side. But then on the downstream side, there's a lot of co-benefits available for using biochar as a physical product. A lot of the attention has focused on biochar as a soil amendment to improve soil health, increase water holding capacity, reduce fertilizer consumption requirements. There are a lot of benefits in agricultural systems, but there are a lot of other benefits in other areas as well, as an additive to concrete and asphalt, as a replacement for peat or perlite in potting media, as a component of biochar enhanced fertilizers. There's a lot of co-benefits that we're working on, and those primarily are related to the physical demand for physical biochar, essentially in products. And there's a lot of work there that's underway.
Yeah. Well, when we think about the key challenges of the industry, there's the 1,000 years you mentioned. Would you consider that to be the biggest challenge, or are there other challenges as well?
I think that's a challenge in a certain sense, but right now what we're seeing is that the voluntary carbon markets are a really strong bright spot in the biochar business model in general. I would say the biggest obstacle to scaling the industry right now is demand for physical biochars. How do we really prove out the value of those co-benefits of biochar to the point that large corporations and others are ready to integrate biochar into their product lines? To date, a lot of those companies are aware of biochar. I'll give you some examples, like fertilizer companies. They're aware of biochar for sure. Their scientists know what it is. Some of their marketers know what it is, and their carbon folks know what it is. They haven't really played ball that much in the biochar space because until the last few years, most of the biochar world was smaller mom and pops organizations that didn't have the ability to produce large volumes of biochar. So for a big multinational fertilizer company, for example, it hasn't yet made a whole lot of sense to really develop product lines around biochar if you can't actually get a consistent supply of the product that you want to launch a global market around, a sort of a global product. So I think we're just getting there now, where a lot of bigger companies are getting ready to engage in a meaningful way in the biochar space. And one thing we're doing at USBI is really leading the charge to develop high quality standards for biochar. Essentially, we're creating something called an American National Standard, which we think will really facilitate the process by which larger companies can confidently buy biochar from a number of different producers. So we think it's moving in the right direction for sure.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, I would love to hear from Jamie a bit about how this translates in real life. So we see some of these challenges and opportunities, and we're particularly interested in increasing access to capital for biochar. But before we get there, Jamie, I would love to hear from you about how creating this market, like the hard work that goes into creating the market. What are you seeing, and what do the numbers say to you, and what are you seeing on the side of demand for the physical biochar product?
Well, that's always been the biggest thing. So we started in the business maybe 14 years ago, something like that. So it was always about where does the carbon go? That was really the critical issue. There really were no carbon credits at the time, and everybody in the industry really looked at using carbon as a soil enhancer, essentially, for agriculture. And when you looked at it, there really was no market for it yet. Nobody really used biochar. Maybe a few thousand years ago they did in the Amazon basin, but not recently. So, and then you look at, is there a value proposition for biochar to add to soil? And the answer is really no. You can't justify the cost to add carbon to soil. And you can't have soybean and corn crops that grow 20 feet tall and justify the cost of adding the carbon to the soil. So we set out to really look at other market opportunities, seeing where fossil-based carbon is used and how it can be displaced by biocarbon. How can we create a value proposition for non-fossil based carbon for driving things forward. So but I think the biggest driver right now is definitely corks and carbon dioxide removal credits. That's generating the huge amount of interest in carbon, biocarbon and carbon removals, and that's where we're seeing so much interest, and that's forcing us to make sure we know where the carbon's going to go and where it can find a home.
Makes sense. I know you're also working on some really interesting use cases for the biochar. So around concrete and animal feed, can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah. So again, when 15 years ago, there was, again, no market for biochar in soil or to move it into agriculture. So we really looked at, one of the things that was actually in agriculture. So there was a study in 2012 by Dr. Lang that identified how biochar could be used to enhance cattle farming and improve the gut health of animals. And it was amazing. Actually, here I'm in Europe right now, and I learned that biochar has actually been used in animal farming for 100 years. So it's actually not something that's new. It's just something that's being renewed, and we're seeing the benefits of these new technologies, which are actually old technologies. But we've always invested in R&D. We work with research institutes around the world. Again, the first we looked at is can we modify the carbon to work in an animal gut, and how can that make a cow produce less methane, have better milk production, have better reproductivity? How can we again use it in concrete? We've had really great results in the last 6 months. So adding 2% of one of our biochar formulas into concrete produced an 18% increase in strength in concrete. So that's really cool. I'm excited to learn more about that. We've looked at, we really believe in activated carbon. So that's an existing and large market. So you have to just change the structure of the biochar so you can enhance the surface area, so it can purify water. It can hold nutrients for a fertilizer product to retain the nutrients. So we're looking at right now supercapacitor and battery technology using carbon electrode. This is really exciting area. So we're constantly investing in R&D. You never know when that new market is going to sort of materialize and grow. So we're constantly investing and excited about more areas and where we can move the carbon that we are removing from the atmosphere.
Yeah. The global biochar market report also states that revenue from credits, and you touched upon this, is the second largest growth driver for the industry. However, 58% of producers say they are not generating any income from carbon credits. So as somebody who's deep in the space, what do you think is fueling the disconnect?
Well, there's many moving parts here. So, there's a good chance that some or many of those companies are not actually generating biochar they don't have markets for the carbon yet. They haven't figured that out, or haven't satisfied all the requirements of the protocols and for selling the carbon credits as well. So we have we've never relied on carbon credits, actually. So we've built the business based on providing a product that has a value proposition. But what carbon credits do is provide an opportunity to move carbon into new markets. So good example is agriculture, where there was not enough value proposition there to move the carbon into the agricultural markets, but carbon credits can provide that value, that extra revenue that can make the product move in large quantities into that space. So I think the companies are facing a lot of challenges. There could be the technology could be an issue, so that's always a big factor. It's thermochemical technology, and sometimes things don't work perfectly right at the beginning, so they may not be producing yet, but they'll figure it out. They may not have the markets sorted out yet, and may have not the carbon credit system figured out yet. So there's many moving parts. So, but those other 42% the 58% will get there eventually. It's just going to take some time.
Yeah, well, appreciate that. And that does lead us right to our next panelist, Joe. Puro is the leading crediting platform for engineered carbon removal. Indeed, in 2019, Puro established the world's first biochar CO2 removal crediting methodology. Can you give us the latest on how Puro is working with biochar producers to certify more projects?
Yeah, definitely. So we kind of go through a normal 2-year cadence of updating our methodologies, and we're going through that process right now to get our current biochar methodology up to snuff with the latest science. So touching on that 1,000-year durability component will be very helpful. It's just where the science is leading us is basically to that for certain properties of biochar. But I guess the other couple things that we're doing just to help move the industry along is going through our Corsia sort of accreditation, the ICBCM. We already have our ICRA in place. And so these kind of things make for a globally fungible carbon credit, something that's going to be usable by any buyer globally. So yeah, those are some of the main things.
Well, what are some of the unique challenges and opportunities you face in certifying projects within the Americas? So for example, how is Puro working to ensure the quality and reliability of carbon credits generated?
Yeah, there's a lot of interest. So I guess I would say with that 58% who are not connected into the carbon crediting space currently, it might have to do with just the fact that a lot of producers have been so small historically, and so we're very much in a transitional phase. There are certain kind of volume requirements that we have in place. I think officially it's 500 tons, which doesn't sound like a lot, but for a very small producer, that could be more than they're doing today. We definitely like to see higher volumes wherever possible, just because that helps make the economics better for everyone involved. But even the producers that have been around for a while, they're, touching on just additionality a little bit here. With the expected increase in volume, which is really going to be millions of tons coming up here any moment, that really creates a complicated situation for somebody that's been relying on a certain price point per physical ton of biochar that they produce. The expectation is that they're not going to be able to get a lot of cash for the actual biochar, so they will be almost entirely dependent on carbon finance.
Got it. Well, in addition to the carbon credit sales in particular, Puro is working to grow the market through partnerships, such as your recent collaboration with Kita, the carbon insurance provider. What drives these partnerships, and what is the impact that you see from them?
Yeah, so just the relationships with Kita, Oka, we work with closely as well, just helping to kind of de-risk projects for various buyers. So those are a couple examples of the partnerships. There's also all sorts of sales channel partners that we work with, Flowcarbon, for example, as well, on sort of blockchain related items, tokenization, wherever people want to buy carbon credits. We want to help create those linkages and make it as easy as possible for suppliers to get involved. So we have an API, for example, that leads directly from the registry to various sales channels, just again, helping to facilitate transactions wherever possible.
Got it. Well, I want to talk a bit about financing and turn over to Martin, whose team is focused on two important aspects of carbon project finance: project growth and credit sales. Flowcarbon recently shared an infographic spotlighting numbers from CDR FYI that showed that $577 million flowed into CDR projects last year, but only 74 million of these dollars went to biochar companies. For some context, biochar ranked 4th last year in terms of investment dollars, behind DAC, direct air capture, cement and concrete, and bio-oil. Martin, can you start off by sharing what you see happening in the biochar investment market right now? Who's interested, who's investing, and why? And how is this impacting the market overall?
Of course, Caroline, and thank you very much, and pleasure to be here with the panelists. I really want to start by answering this question, building on Myles' fantastic contextualization of biochar and the flexibility of biochar for both financing purposes and the promise of the market. We see tremendous excitement in the biochar market from all sorts of stakeholders. And I would say those stakeholders are at various level of points of readiness to invest. So let me take a minute and just break that down a little bit for the audience. On the carbon credit side, where we speak to hundreds of corporates as part of our business, and as everyone knows from the CDR.FYI data, huge amounts of purchases have been made of biochar spot credits, as well as offtakes from some of the biggest buyers. And we're starting to see a tremendous amount of interest from a wider set of corporates to engage in biochar credits and corks as the supply that Joe was talking about come online. Still a bit of work to do, I would say, in developing more broadly the Microsoft Frontier next-gen offtake approaches to the market, and that's going to be critical for financing. But nonetheless, some really encouraging first steps. When we take a step back and we look at actually the financing of the projects themselves, and Myles referred to this, a tremendous amount of early stage equity capital has gone into a whole host of projects to get them off the ground. The idea of the biochar project from the piece of paper to its first purchases, its first levels of activity. And if you just take a look at wonderful lists of projects such as those shared in the USBI website, we know there are hundreds and hundreds of biochar projects globally that have taken that step to invest equity dollars. But for the market to scale to the level that we all need it to scale to achieve the carbon removal targets that we all know are so critical, we have to have asset level financing. We have to have project level financing. And at Flowcarbon, we're really focused on unlocking this question of project level debt financing. And what are we seeing there? On the optimistic side, we see multitudes of investors with hundreds of billions of capital in traditional institutional asset management mandates that can look at projects like biochar, whether through a sustainable infrastructure mandate, whether through a carbon mandate, whether through waste to value type mandates. There's all sorts of mandates that these investors have, but very little awareness of biochar, even though they may be aware of things like biogas and renewable natural gas that use very similar feedstocks. But the critical thing is, once they take the time to actually do the work and understand many of the key promising features of biochar, technology readiness, strengths of contracts away from carbon credits, the emergence of more carbon credit offtakes, they're taking the time to do the work, do the diligence with partners like Flowcarbon to understand the opportunity set. And we find this very, very encouraging for the future of the market.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, you and your team talk to potential investors all the time,
Yep.
and you talk to projects. So how do they work together better? Like, how are ways that we can connect the gap?
It's a great question. I think at Flowcarbon and for the biochar community at large, what's really important is really taking the time to understand when is the right time to introduce a potential biochar project to a project level debt investor. You don't want to go too early because usually you get a few bites at the apple to impress an investor with what the potentials are. You also don't want to go too late where there's many people in a process. Hopefully we'll be at that point in the biochar market down the line where there are multiple financing providers. So you want to find that right spot in that right time. So how can I best contextualize that for the audience? I would say, you want to see some equity dollars being spent. You want to see some investment already been made by the community to get the project up and running. Clearly, a track record of actually working to develop a project, make some biochar, have some provisional credits potentially issued by Puro. There are things you can do to demonstrate that you have a credible team, a credible business plan, and also have, I would say, a willingness to work with intermediaries like Flowcarbon and debt investors to get the project to a point where it's financeable. And what debt investors really want to understand, in addition to all of those qualitative things I just mentioned, is the soundness of the contracts that are underpinning the business model. And whereas we are incredibly optimistic about the future of carbon credits and what that can entail, especially as the voluntary carbon markets grow, as many expect, we also have to appreciate what's financeable now. And what is financeable now? Durable feedstock. Looking in the places where you can sell the biochar, the strength of those contracts. can the biochar producer make renewable power and sell it to someone under a PPA? There's a wonderful litany of tax credits that are available to projects in the US, investment tax credits, there's performance tax credits coming online. All of these tools represent the sandbox that debt investors are going to be most focused on. And it's really about finding the right time to get involved in that discussion and help these wonderful developers manage the process to successful financing.
Okay, you answered my next question, which is what are you looking for in a project? Right? What are investors looking for? Is there anything else beyond the durability and the
Yeah,
stuff?
I was recently talking with a really prominent buyer of credits that said they really look at three things. They look at the tech, they look at the team, and they look at the feedstock. Those are really the three key things that I also think debt investors are going to be equally focused on. The fabulous thing that Myles referred to at the beginning, Jamie's reinforced it as well, is the technology supporting biochar is very well understood by the market. It's been out there for a long period of time, and you don't have to spend that much time convincing folks of tech risk. But as you can imagine, if you modify the tech, if you add some bells and whistles to it, then you start to creep into that newness that is always more and more uncomfortable for a debt investor who wants predictability and the knowledge that they're going to recoup their capital. The team, I think, is self-evident. You know, teams like Jamie are fantastic. They've been in the business for over a decade making biochar. And then if I were to add a fourth one to that, it would be contracts. It has to come down to the durability of the contracts. Debt investors want to extend capital for typically, ideally 5 years on the shorter end. They're happy to go longer, 10, 12 years. So if it's contract lending, you need to have strong contracts that are going to make sure that the feedstock will be delivered and the revenues will be there to cover the costs.
Okay, well, and according to CDR-FYI, 83% of purchasers, the credit purchasers in particular, are motivated by the early development of the market, and there is a point around pricing. So the price of each of these carbon credits. Are you finding that to be true of investors as well?
Yeah, so what I would say is, debt investors are very reliant on contracted cash flows. So most of the time, project finance investors, are going to be looking to finance projects that have durable cash flows, oftentimes outside of credits, because we just don't have that many long-dated offtakes of credit purchases other than the few banner and critically important names that have done that. But that doesn't mean it's not part of the decision calculus. And I think part of the importance of education and communication is to highlight just how attractively priced biochar credits are for what they actually deliver. For sure, hundreds of years of permanent carbon removal, many, as Myles pointed out, could argue it's in the thousands. There's very strong science to support the durability of it, and investors knowing and us educating investors about the growth of the voluntary carbon market, the importance of biochar credits as part of that market over time. As you can imagine, these are capital arrangements which in a perfect world will go 5, 7, 10 years. We all expect and we all hope, and announcements like the ones we saw this morning from the US government, these are very encouraging signs that investors can be confident about the future directionality of the market, knowing that the price point of these credits is also attractive in a spot context relative to other removal methodologies.
Well, you actually touched on something that I find particularly exciting, which is this morning's announcement that the Biden administration put out some guidelines around voluntary carbon credits, which is a great signal for purchasers around how this can fit into a net zero plan and a real validator for the market. And I'm curious to hear from each of you, do a quick round robin about how this or other developments, what's most exciting and what your outlook is on the next 5-10 years in the VCM broadly, but really for what that means for biochar specifically. I'll just go in order of how I'm seeing it on my Zoom screen. So I'm going to pass it over to Jamie. Jamie, and then Myles, Joe, Martin.
Yeah, well, I'm excited about biochar just because it's I think it's one of the best ways to, the most efficient ways to process waste biomass, which is what we do. So it's a great efficient technology to produce a highly valuable product. So the real bonus is that we can remove carbon from the atmosphere. So we're just excited about the interest in carbon removals and how that can help us grow the industry and move the, you know, build the scope and the technology forward. So it's an exciting world. So any of these developments in legislation and sort of the, you know, the voluntary carbon markets, everything adds to helping out this great technology. And so we just look forward to continuing to grow and remove carbon from the atmosphere and generate good things for the environment and good materials for the planet.
Great.
Great. Yeah, in terms of kind of where the VCM is going, what I'm seeing is that a lot of the big early players in the VCM for durable carbon removal, players like Microsoft, Stripe, Frontier, you know, they've bought enormous amounts of credits and they've largely focused on quality over pricing. So in some ways, they're sort of incentivizing the development of technologies that maybe in the future will be affordable. At the same time, as we get towards 2030 and companies with SBTI targets, if they're interested in using any CDR credits as part of their targets, they're probably interested in the lowest cost CDR technology that achieves some amount of durability and additionality. You know, that has led some organizations to, I think, pivot towards durable CDR as opposed to nature-based solutions. And in a lot of ways, I think biochar is currently in the sweet spot between kind of nature-based solutions that are hard to monitor and verify, and much, much cheaper than a lot of the potential technologies that will be effective in the future. I think biochar is at the right price point to really grow and thrive in that space. So I think there's going to be a lot more interest in biochar carbon removal credits as we move forward.
And yeah, I definitely see biochar being a leading approach to CDR, partly because of the IPCC endorsing biochar as a sound approach to carbon removal. So that was a nice boost to see that. At the end of the day, we've already talked about this throughout the webinar, is just the technology has evolved. It's quite advanced relative to other approaches to CDR. The science is sound, and there's a lot of low-hanging fruit. There's a lot of waste biomass out there, whether it's sugarcane bagasse or, you know, nutshells and things like that, that are just widely available to use. As Myles was talking about too, there's all of these SBTI net zero commitments coming up. So demand, while it is, I guess, lacking from where we want to see it today, it is growing year over year extensively. So very promising. And as far as the government is concerned, they are very interested in a lot of things. We're meeting with DOE and such almost every week, if not every other week. Yeah.
Martin, any thoughts you want to add there?
Yeah, sure. I'll add a couple quick things, Caroline. You know, one of the things that tremendously excites me about the future for biochar is the, you know, terrific conversations we're having with private credit investors who have tremendous amounts of capital to put to work, have experience in areas like renewable natural gas and biogas, which is just a stone's throw ahead of biochar, I would argue, and their willingness to dig in and learn. And when we have the privilege of having finance experts, carbon markets experts, and professionals speaking to the credit sales community, when we can unlock that power of the franchise and have these robust conversations, the level of sophistication of the dialogues that we're able to unlock with investors is tremendously encouraging. And then the second thing I would just also add is the flexibility of the product and the power of the product is also really important, because as Jamie pointed out pretty well, things like green cement and things like green steel, they're coming fast and furious. And that's terrific for biochar because the demand side of those large multinationals that want the biochar for input is at really significant scale. And as the biochar market grows up, it will be able to deliver into that scale. And so what I see in the future is a tremendously flexible market. You could even make the argument it's more flexible than other CDR pathways that could be completely for physical inputs into, carbon negative products. And it could also scale beautifully into the cork market and the CDR market. And so we see that here at Flowcarbon every day. All of those things I mentioned, we're involved in all those discussions, and that brings us tremendous optimism that this market will be special.
Great. We have a ton of Q&A coming in. So, and this was actually a good transition to a question directed towards you, Martin, which I will read from the audience. I know we'll still have a couple more coming in, and we've limited time left, but I want to get to some of these. So thinking in terms of an integrated biorefinery from the various biomass feedstocks, is anyone investigating upgrading to more highly valued biographite, graphene, or graphene oxide? And are there progressive investors interested in these other bioproducts from what you're seeing in the market, Martin?
That is a really, really good question. I must admit some of the technicalities of the feedstock may be a little bit beyond my immediacy of answering that question. But here's what I will say, and I'm happy to follow up offline with the individual who asked that question, is there is tremendous focus on things like durability of feedstock, flexibility of feedstock, and the ability of that to work within the technology stack, the pyrolysis stack, for lack of a better word, which has to convert that into different outputs and different revenue streams. And the way I like to think about it all the time is that even though pyrolysis is a very well understood technology in many cases, how you turn the dials matters a lot in terms of what you actually get out of it. We've seen, just to maybe bring a little bit of the question to life, we have seen examples in our pipeline here at Flowcarbon where with the same feedstock, we can see some developers just focused on products like renewable natural gas and others just focused on biochar. So what I mean by that is, the upgrading of feedstocks, the fine tuning of processes. These are all things that once diligenced can potentially be super interesting to investors.
We had a few questions with this level of technicality. Another one, but this was more directed towards Joe, was can you elaborate on the specific agricultural biomass project? For example, sugarcane biogas in South Louisiana on the Puro registry. So what are the metrics of that project? And is there more, the carbon credits, tons of biochar that are being produced, and are there specific other products beyond biochar specifically that you're seeing more and more of?
So yeah, I guess I'm not sure the full extent of the question, but yeah, if you go look around, you'll see that there are existing processes that have a lot of waste biomass, but they really don't have anything to do with it. So the sugarcane big ass project in Louisiana is a great one in particular. They're kind of scaling up their operation to do ultimately hundreds of thousands of tons. That's American biocarbon. There are others that are taking the same process and running with it as well. We did a little bit of research in Brazil, and you can just look at some of the Google Maps and find these ethanol production facilities and whatnot where they just are sitting on top of all sorts of biomass that's just kind of smoldering away, not being used for anything particularly useful. So a lot of opportunities there. The Wonderful Company is another one where the world's largest nut producer, working closely with those folks. They've already got some biochar going on and some other different initiatives that they're planning. So lots of stuff there. And hopefully that answers some of the question. Maybe if there's any other elements I'm happy to answer that too.
Great. So if there are other panelists who want to hop into some of these questions, also just let me know. They're somewhat topical to or directed towards specific panelists, but I think you all have a lot to add to all of them. So here's one that was directed towards Myles, which is the biochar market seems to be booming. Would it be fair to say that biochar would wind up a commodity on the markets regardless of feedstock? Would it be a fairly liquid product, or is it expected to have pockets of demand over parts of the US with bilateral contracts used for offtakes?
I think it will evolve into probably both of those things. I think in some spaces there will be commodity markets for biochar, but it's probably going to be relatively common types of biochar. So you can make biochar from essentially any waste biomass, but there are clearly types of waste biomass that are going to be more common. An example is sawdust or wood chips from timber production, right? So there's a lot of extra sawdust at mills today that can be converted into biochar. There's a lot of that material scattered around the country. It tends to be regionally scattered with the feedstock production industries. So wood is going to be on the West Coast and Southeast, and a little bit in the Great Lakes and Northeast. In those areas, because that's such an enormous feedstock, I think high temperature wood biochar will likely emerge as a commodity product. That might be true for some other feedstocks as well. But as we get more differences in feedstocks, some of those smaller feedstock opportunities, I think, are unlikely to become commodities unless they get sort of modified in ways that make them suitable for a range of applications.
Okay. Jamie, this is a question directed towards you, which is, can you explain your thinking on the energy requirements for activating carbon? It seems to be a highly energy intensive process, which might impair the carbon benefits of the char.
Yeah, you know, I think that's it's interesting that it's actually a misnomer. I think it is energy. Energy is needed, but the energy all comes from the waste material in our process. So you're going to either throw the material into a landfill and dispose of it, or otherwise waste it, or you can use some of that material to create the energy. So the activation process is actually what's called exothermic. So once you reach a certain temperature, the process actually generates heat in itself. And when you're using the biomaterials for the heat, it's very, very efficient. So I think if you do try to activate carbon with electricity or fossil fuel, yeah, you'll be burning a lot of fuel and electricity. But if you do it smartly, so this is smart carbon smart conversations. If you do it smartly, absolutely, it's very energy efficient. But you do know that you do emit some of the carbon does get released as carbon dioxide, because what you're doing is creating a lot of surface areas. So it's kind of like an Aero chocolate bar. So you're kind of heating out the carbon in the mass, and then you have extra surface areas. So you do emit more carbon dioxide, but you can do it very, very energy efficiently with the energy from biomass itself.
Okay, I have not related biochar and chocolate before, but I like them both. And now I see the overlap, the similarities. So there's
Biochar
a question.
is like chocolate.
What? Yeah.
Biochar is just like chocolate, right?
Now I get it. Now I see. This is a question directed towards everybody. Symbiosis was just founded as a response for nature-based solutions to Frontier. However, it seems not to include biochar, as it is focused on nature and restoration projects. Excluding biochar projects to access a large pool of investment and to be seen as one of the CDR flagships. Could the panelists share their thoughts about how Frontier and symbiosis is impacting the biochar industry?
So I mean, yeah, I guess I'll just say, you know, Frontier and symbiosis kind of serve different purposes. Everybody from the biochar industry wants to be involved with Frontier, and for various reasons, durability or what have you, it's not necessarily a good fit for them. But what I do like to share with people is that, you know, that's just one buyer group. They do seem important because, and they very much are. But biochar actually stands on its own two legs already without having that kind of advanced market commitment. So the same organizations that are part of Frontier, for example, are also very big buyers of biochar corks. Shopify, Microsoft isn't one of them, but obviously they're a huge buyer. So yeah, fortunately, Frontier is just kind of a small portion of what those companies actually purchase in terms of carbon credits. And they are also very much increasing their biochar spend separately.
Does anyone else want to share thoughts on those buyer groups?
I think for a long time, and it's probably continuing, biochar is something of an orphan between the nature-based solutions folks and the engineered solutions. And I think for many of us in the industry, that seems like that we're being left out. But another way to look at it is we're actually, as Joe said, standing on our own 2 feet and creating a separate space between those two. And I think we're sort of aiming towards the right mix of quality, durability, and price. That's really going to lead biochar to be the preferred option for a lot of organizations moving forward.
I was just going to echo Joe's comment, which is, several of the participating companies that are in Symbiosis and Frontier, apart from those advanced market commitments, do actively procure and look at biochar, which I think is important to highlight as well.
Great. Well, as the final question I'll ask, because I know we're nearing the end, is it's a question for everybody, and it's just a very broad question. How big do you think the biochar market can grow?
I think globally biochar could easily deliver 1 billion tons a year, possibly more, but a lot of it will depend on how feedstock is, I think, partitioned into different competing industries that are going to all be looking for waste biomass.
Do you have a time frame on that?
2045 or 50, probably, realistically. I would like it to be sooner, we all would, but it's probably not going to be.
Fair enough.
There definitely is a lot of competing interest for waste biomass. For a variety of purposes. So that is going to be one limiting factor. And then there is also just a limit to how much biomass is available for this type of thing. Puro does allow for purpose-grown feedstock, and I think that is just something people will have to kind of wrap their heads around, because you can purpose grow biomass for biochar, and I don't see anything wrong with that. But yeah, so just different viewpoints on it. But it can be very big, and there are scientific research. There is studies. There is research on this that shows what is available for CDR. Or other purposes. So
yeah,
I would say it's definitely in the trillions for sure. I mean, carbon should be used in everything. If a road is built, add biocarbon or bio oil to the asphalt itself. If a building is built, we can add the carbon to the concrete and the steel. If a car, we can have green roof on that building as well. If a car is built, make it out of carbon, use graphene or carbon for the batteries. So we have 2.4 trillion tons of carbon to make up for since the Industrial Revolution. So that's a lot of carbon dioxide. So we need to be thinking about adding carbon to everything. So the market is massive if we can and think about that. But to Joseph's point, yeah, we definitely have to look at how the feedstocks are going to come into place. Definitely billions of tons, even just from waste. But purpose-grown feedstock is going to be critical. How we look at that. But the market is massive, and it's a bright future.
Yeah, and I was just gonna add, the 3 biochar experts will leave to the market sizing and growth of the asset class from a financing perspective. We've been delighted to see that there are some terrific developers out there that today can support project level debt in the magnitude of $20 to $40 million for project 2. And these are super ambitious, terrific developers that have terrific scaling plans. And they will scale into more financing over time. I would just take a look at markets like renewable natural gas and things that use waste to value conversion. Look how much that market has grown. But we're at the beginning of a cycle that, as long as we are diligent and thoughtful about presenting this opportunity to the institutional investor community that has the ability to invest in these projects, there's no reason this can't scale to super exciting financing levels that makes it a more routine investable project style for the private credit community.
Yeah. All right. Well, on that note, I want to thank all of you for all sides of this market, everything from the financing to the accreditation of carbon credit to the sales of carbon credits. We covered a lot today. So thank you, all of our panelists, for making this a very insightful and broadly ranging conversation. You are truly leading the way for this industry, and one that we all believe very much will grow to something massive. I want to thank all of our attendees for joining us. We had a very full webinar today. If you would like to learn more about biochar, I encourage you to read our helpful article, Biochar 101, Your Essential Carbon Capture Guide, which is on flowcarbon.com. And we have shared that link in the comments as well. I encourage everyone to join us for all of our upcoming webinar and in-person events. If you follow us on our socials, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram, you can find out more. And a recording of this webinar will be available soon on our YouTube channel. We will send out the link to all registrants. Finally, if you'd like to partner with us, or any panelists on our upcoming events, please reach out to Jennifer at flowcarbon.com. And thank you all very much for joining us.